Tonight we're going to look at the Middle East. And it is changing rapidly, and I did change my slides at the last minute because things are moving so very, very rapidly. And the emotion and the drama that's pervading the Middle East, and particularly the nation of Israel, is absolutely staggering. Now, those... Yep, it's on my screen here. Those three pictures there really describe the dramatic changes which are occurring in the Middle East. The dominance of Israel in that region, the emotion of the hostages being released, and the dramatic change of regime in Syria. In fact, that man down there looks a bit like Theodore Herzl, doesn't he, a little bit? But that is our new leader in Syria. And these changes have happened within the last 2 months or so. It's just been absolutely amazing what's happened in that region. And all of those countries which we have listed there in the Middle East have something which points towards a prophetic fulfillment for us to notice. Let's turn to Ezekiel 38, good old Ezekiel 38, which offers so much in the prophetic expectations. And words we know so well in verse 11. Gog shall say, I will come up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, having neither bars nor gates. And I'm sure we're aware that that word safely, as we have there on the screen, really has the idea of security, abstract safety, either perception or reality. And I think we can say, brothers and sisters, that really that has been the nation of Israel in relation to this last war under the Middle East. They are secure, not only in their weaponry, in their sophistication, in their intelligence, in their technology, but also with their newfound alliance with Donald Trump. And that security will increase. It will continue to increase as we see the development through that area. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at Israel and the way they are positioned in the Middle East at the moment. In Daniel chapter 11 and verse 40, I'd like you to come across to that. We have another key prophetic expectation, and that has to do with the king of the north. Daniel 11 verse 40. The end of a magnificent chapter of the king of the north versus the king of the south. We read in verse 40, at the time of the end, and we are living at the time of the end. The time of the end is defined in this movement in verse 40. It's also defined in Ezekiel 38 as the time when Israel is back in their land. And here we have in Daniel 11 verse 40, the king of the north shall push at him, the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, with horsemen, with many ships. He shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. And in that verse itself, we really have three specific powers. We have the king of the north, which is the area of the Seleucid territory. We have the king of the south, which was the area of Egypt under the Ptolemies. And we have a third power there called him in verse 40. And without going into the context of Daniel 11, that him is really the king of fierce countenance who's mentioned in verse 36. He is a third power, a power that dominates the region of Turkey, the ancient capital of Constantinople. And so the prophetic indication of verse 40 was very clear. The Ottoman power had dominance over the region of the Middle East up until World War I. The king of the south is a power, a foreign power in occupation of Egypt, and that was fulfilled when Britain moved into Egypt in 1882 and pushed the Turks out of Palestine. What is intriguing is that the king of the south disappears from the prophetic record, because you see in verse 42, it's no longer the king of the south, it's the land of Egypt. And while you may have this idea, king of the north, king of the south, actually the king of the south has gone. The king of the south has moved off the scene. Britain in Egypt was the king of the south. It fulfilled its prophetic destiny in pushing the Turks out of Palestine, and now it's just the land of Egypt. And that means that Egypt will remain independent until it's taken by Russia in this sweeping invasion of Daniel chapter 11. Now, we're going to focus really on the king of the north. See, the king of the north is this Seleucid empire. Seleucid was one of Alexander's generals, and Russian influence in that whole region is significant. We've got a question mark against Syria, which we'll actually see. But what we're finding is that Russia, in fact, will continue to dominate that whole area of the king of the north. It's already got Turkmenistan. It's already got Iran. It had Syria. We'll talk a little bit about Russia and Syria in a moment. And yet to come is Iraq, which is bending towards Russia, and of course Pakistan, all within that region of the ancient king of the north. Russia is dominating that region, and that's why it has become, in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, the king of the north. And the next phase of verse 40 is, of course, the invasion of the Him, Turkey, and then moving through into the rest of the Middle East. We're going to see the development in those regions of Russia. Let's come back to Ezekiel 38. The allies of Ezekiel 38 are clearly enumerated. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them. Persia, the Hebrew word, refers to the modern nation of Iran. The Hebrew word refers to Persia proper, as well as the Iranian or Persian Empire. And we're going to see the developments that have occurred in that region of Iran today. Also with them are Ethiopia. Now, unfortunately, the English version, Ethiopia, doesn't really reflect the significance of the Hebrew. The Hebrew word is Cush. Cush began in the area of the Mesopotamian Valley under Nimrod, and through a series of migrations, ended up actually dominating the area we now know today as Sudan. So there on the map on the screen, you've got Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia. And the Ethiopia of Scripture is the modern Sudan of modern times. And we'll look at the development really in relation to that. So the area of Cush is this area known today, as I mentioned, as Sudan, which is in awful trouble, which Russia has taken advantage of. And lastly, we have Libya. The Hebrew word is Phut, P-H-U-T. And Josephus tells us that it means Libya. So it's well translated in the Authorized Version. And if the area of ancient Put was mainly Libya, a little bit of Algeria, but mainly Libya. And the Lubim were the Libyans who allied themselves with the ancient Egyptians. All of that has a significance. We're going to see the prophetic development in those countries of Sudan and also Libya itself. And good old Australia. We know in verse 13 of Ezekiel 38 that we expect to see this alliance developing, formulating, and strengthening. I want you to notice that Sheba and Dedan, merchants of Tarshish, and all the young lions are there in this prophetic picture. Sheba is the ancient area of Yemen. Can look at Yemen. Dedan is the ancient area of Saudi Arabia today, that Arabian Peninsula. Tarshish, of course, is the British power, and the young lions, all the young lions, are those nations that are associated in ideology and politics and affinity with the British power. Australia is one of them, even though we have a very left-leaning government at the moment, a foreign minister who is not particularly adept at supporting Israel, but who knows, that will change. And whatever power rules Australia in the future, eventually it will continue to be a strengthening relationship with the nation of Israel. So we're going to look at these nations themselves. The mouth of the dragon has a significant role to play. The mouth of the dragon, says Brother Thomas in Eureka, established itself upon the shores of the Bosphorus. It is actually the power of Constantinople or Turkey. Certainly, we've heard of a third Rome in Moscow, but apocalyptically, revelation-wise, the dragon actually is the nation of Turkey. When it's taken over by Russia, Russia will assume the power of the dragon in the prophetic word. And we're going to look at Turkey. Turkey on the stage at the moment is what a vicious enemy of Israel. From the mouth of the dragon proceeds influences, frog spirits, which assist in drawing the nations to Armageddon. And we're going to see that the policies of Turkey, the policies of this country, out of the mouth of that power, indeed are bringing nations towards battle and warfare. So all of that prophetic expectation sets the drama and the scene for what we expect in the countries. So let's take, for example, Syria. And that picture is a pretty good idea of how the Syrians feel about their previous leader. Bullet holes in the eye. It really is amazing how quickly this regime under Bashar al-Assad fell. Within 2 weeks, he was out. He had to flee to Moscow, and there he lives with his billions of dollars collected in isolation in Moscow. But the regime change has been highly significant from a prophetic point of view. It's allowed a number of chess pieces to be moved across the board in that region. This is the new leader of the Syrian regime. He was a wanted terrorist 2 months ago. $10 million was placed on his head, and he rolled up in a suit. He had an interview with the Americans, and the Americans dropped the bounty. So it's an amazing change for this man, really quite a remarkable change. Will the leopard change its spots? Well, we've yet to see that, don't we? But he's the new ruler, and the whole of Syria has, in fact, changed quite dramatically. There on the screen, you'll see there that Syria is like a patchwork quilt at the moment. That area there in light brown is the area which HTS, which is that rebel group, that area has now been taken by that rebel group, and they are now in Damascus, ruling from Damascus. But as you can see from that map, the challenge for this new ruler is to try and bring together all these disparate parts of the country. The area there in yellow there, light yellow, that's the area which Turkey is currently moving in. They've crossed the border into Syria, and they are dominating that little area there. In fact, Turkey supported HTS in its move into Damascus. So that support will allow Turkey to meddle once more within the regime of Syria. You can see there the purple color. The purple color are the Kurds. Now, the Kurds are supported by the United States. So within Syria, we have Turkey, we have HTS, and we have the Kurds supported by the US, all vying for power in Syria. Eventually, Russia will dominate that region. As far as Iran is concerned, they're not very happy with this new regime. They've called them a group of troublemakers exploiting Syria's weaknesses to drag them into chaos. Well, Iran is chafing because, you see, it's lost its corridor into Lebanon. Syria was a significant channel by which Iran moved weaponry and intelligence and logistics from Iran through Syria into Lebanon that's now been cut off. Really quite intriguing the way that's happened. And that's given Israel, of course, a tremendous advantage, having cut off that channel of weaponry movement. I don't know whether you know, but Syrian refugees form the second largest number of refugees, forced displacement in the world. Sudan is the first. 7 million people have fled their lives from Syria. You imagine that, 7 million people fleeing into other countries. And those countries are now bulging at the seams, hoping that refugees are actually going to return. A number of those refugees, of course, poured across into Europe, which has put pressure on that particular area of the world. They want to come back. This is going to change the demography of Syria again. What will happen to those refugees, we don't know. But it will release pressure on Jordan, release pressure on Turkey, release pressure on other areas of the Middle East that have taken these refugees in and allow some type of melting pot within Syria once more. Everything is changing dramatically. Now, one of the countries that's benefited from the regime change is Israel. They're on the map there. Those red dots are areas in which Israel has struck multiple times. And you can see on the right-hand side of that, the damage that Israel has done. It's wiped out Syria's navy. It's wiped out their chemical weapons plants, wiped out their air force. The whole place has been decimated. Israel has taken a preemptive strike and is in a very strong position now to actually establish itself within this particular area here at peace with Syria. It's also taken Mount Hermon and also moved just at the base of Hermon facing Damascus. Israel has said this is our buffer zone. This is the area we want to take to ensure that we are safe and secure, and we're going to stay on Mount Hermon indefinitely. Now, of course, Syria's not happy with that, but what can he do? His whole country is in fragments. He's going to spend the next 4 years rebuilding his country. There's nothing much he can do. You may be interested to know, brothers and sisters, that when Moses actually delineated the extent of the land that Israel should take when it came from Egypt, it actually took the area of Hermon and also the area of the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon right through beyond Tyre to Zidon. So all of that region, which we know today as Lebanon and Syria, was actually promised to the nation of Israel under the dispensation of Moses. So it's really quite intriguing that they are establishing themselves militarily and strategically to continue that safety and security that they feel. There's no way that this Syrian ruler can push Israel out of there. They're just too strong for them. And that brings us to Russia. Now, on the map there, you'll see that Russia has two significant bases in Syria. There is the Air Force Base, and there is the port, Tartus, down there on the coast. And the difficulty has been is that the HTS, when it's come into Syria, has now got to decide what it's going to do with these two Russian bases. Now, these two bases are strategically significant for Russia. Russia has used these bases to funnel weapons into Libya and into North Africa. And therefore, it wants to retain them at all costs. Well, they've just had discussions last week, and the consultations have gone reasonably well. Russia has very, very diplomatically moved most of its weaponry and its logistical support from the port and the airport and moved them back to Russia, just in case things don't work out. But they are negotiating at the moment to retain those bases and those ports. We'll see what discussions are like. The difficulty that HTS has is that Russia bombed and strafed and killed thousands of their rebels in that movement. So there's a bit of a problem here. HTS and Russia don't get on, but Russia is trying to establish some rapport to continue those bases. Now, we know that Russia must dominate that King of the North territory. So by hook or by crook, Russia will continue to retain that, or if pushed out, will soon come back, because that's the prophetic indication that the Word of God has. And simultaneous to that, Trump wants to withdraw his troops from Syria. So we have HTS dominating. We have the Kurds supported by America, and America saying we're not happy staying in there much longer. And we have the Russian bases, which are a question mark at the moment. So the whole place is fluid. We can imagine the angels working through all of these diplomatic niceties and unniceties, ensuring that the words of the prophets are fulfilled. But it's really very much balls up in the air at the moment. And what is interesting is that the leader of HTS, Al-Jilani, Al-Shamar, as his proper name is, has made his first diplomatic visit, and he didn't go to Iran. He went to Saudi Arabia. And that indicates a total shift of thinking in Syria. Previously, Syria was Iran's proxy, completely linked to the mullahs, the ayatollahs in Iran. That has now been severed. And this visit indicates a pivotal shift of Syria's interests in the Middle East. No longer are they interested in courting Iran, they're courting Saudi Arabia. Now, what does that mean prophetically? Well, Saudi Arabia has the money, and that's why he's there. If Saudi Arabia pumps dollars into Syria, there will be conditions attached to that investment. And part of that investment conditions will be making peace, demilitarizing. And this allows us to understand that the groundwork of peace may be being laid in this particular area. It's really a wait-and-see situation. But that visit was quite significant, breaking links with the Iranian power into Saudi Arabia. Let's talk Turkey, the mouth of the dragon. Well, this man has been in power for 22 years. And relations between Turkey and Israel started off quite amicable, but things deteriorated soon after Turks were killed in trying to force aid into Gaza. The Israelis boarded the ship, that they thought it was just an ordinary vessel with aid workers, and they found out actually there were Turkish militants on board, and Israel killed some of those. And since then, the whole atmosphere between Turkey and Israel has gone down very quickly. So, not many nations sever relations with other countries, but Turkey's done that. He has nothing to do now with Israel. He's wiped all diplomatic relations out of and thrown out the window. There was an article appearing in the Jewish news service, "Jerusalem doesn't belong to you, President Erdogan." In response to loud chants of "Mr. President, take us to Jerusalem" from a crowd of young people in Mardin, Turkey, during a December 22 speech, Turkish President Erdogan shockingly responded, "Patience brings victory," instead of chiding the crowd about their inappropriate demand. Lest there be any misunderstanding about the intent of this exchange, Erdogan has implied a number of times since 2020 that Jerusalem belongs to Turkey. Indeed, the leader of the nationalist movement, Erdogan's coalition partner, in an address the very next day, reportedly declared that the goal was for Turkey to take Jerusalem. This is in line with resurgent neo-Ottoman posture of Erdogan. Now that is now out in the open. We want Jerusalem. Part of the Ottoman Empire, when the Turks dominated that area of the Middle East, Jerusalem was part of the Ottoman Empire. We want it back. Now, that kind of inflammatory language is only going to be fermented when Russia takes Turkey and Turkey agrees with the Russian invasion of Israel. We want Jerusalem back. And so this response from the Jews, Jerusalem does not belong to you, President Erdogan. The Turkish Empire, symbolized by the Euphrates in the book of Revelation, chapter 16, is not going to expand beyond its current borders. The Euphrates has dried up. The Ottoman Empire has disappeared. Erdogan is in fantasy land if he thinks he's going to get that empire back. But those thoughts of taking Jerusalem will simmer in that nation for many years to come. Recently in Israel, there was what called the Nagel Committee. Nagel was a former chief justice, and he was commissioned with looking at the new way the IDF was going to operate. And he made the point to the government that Israel must prepare for potential war with Turkey, that Israel should not underestimate the power and the military capability that Turkey has. All of that will be enhanced and enlarged by Russia when she takes Turkey and they form this alliance to go into the region of Israel. Turkey wants Jerusalem. The threat from Syria could evolve into something even more dangerous than the Iranian threat, said the report. Turkey backs HTS. Turkey backs the new Syrian government. And it wouldn't be something which is not seen, said the Nagel Committee, in that Turkey may foment further disturbances within Syria, seeking to push rebels across into Israel, worse than the Iranian alliance. So really that mouth of the dragon, that area of Turkey is fomenting war. And that'll be part of the whole exercise of those frog spirits to bring these nations into the region of Armageddon. Again, the Jewish News Service, amid Mideast power upheaval, Turkey emerges as a threat for the US and for Israel. And the problem the US has got is that Turkey is a NATO member. Turkey is supposed to be in alliance with America, but their ambitions are at the moment anti-America. So it's a very complex situation there in this region. Well, Russia and Iran. Just recently, a few weeks ago, Russia and Iran moved to strengthen their military ties. They signed a 20-year strategic partnership treaty covering areas of defense, technology, energy, and trade. Iran has already been responsible for supplying drones to Russia. And in this treaty, Russia is going to bypass all of the Western sanctions and buy its oil direct from Iran. So it's a very cozy relationship. Ezekiel 38 tells us that Russia and Persia, Iran will continue to be allies right to the very end. And that's only going to strengthen. What is intriguing about Iran at the moment is that since Israel's hit Iran, and since Israel has removed some of the key players, terrorists, from the map, from the chessboard, the Iranian power base to the Ayatollahs is in danger actually of collapsing. Simple things like head coverings in Iran has created enormous distress, in which women have said we refuse to wear head coverings in the streets. And the crackdown by the Revolutionary Guard has only increased the animosity between the general people and the Iranian government. Israel's hoping for a regime change. But we know prophetically that this arrangement will continue to be strengthened. Doesn't matter who is in power in Iran, Russia and Iran will continue to ally themselves solidly. That brings us to Israel. And for those of you who came to the Youthaleia night last year, the particular speaker there had a little video clip of the dominance of photographs and pictures of the hostages still in captivity at Hamas. It has dominated Israel's society. The whole psyche of the nation is focused not just on getting rid of Hamas, but in getting those hostages back. And the peace deal, which comes in a number of phases, is currently undergoing phase one. Phase one is complete ceasefire, withdrawal of Israeli troops, and the release of 33 hostages. And aid goes back into Gaza. Once that's been accomplished, phase two will then come in, where there's an end of the war, release of the remaining hostages, and the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza and a permanent ceasefire. Now, I think that Trump and Netanyahu are discussing phase two, because there's rumors that Netanyahu, once he's got the hostages back, will continue to go into Gaza and get rid of Hamas. But we'll see what happens there. And phase three, the tragic story of bringing out the remains of those hostages that have died in captivity. You know, we are talking about a very bittersweet deal. For every Israeli released, dozens of Palestinian murderers, rapists and thieves are being released from Israeli prison. And Israel knows that those people will reoffend. They will go back into their society as heroes, and they will then determine once more to plot against Israel. Israel knows that. And that's why through all the emotion of those hostages coming back, it's a bittersweet deal. Israel is caught. Very strong left movement within Israel wanting those hostages back at all costs. And the right-wing part of Netanyahu's government is saying we need to destroy Hamas at all costs. And of course, the two are virtually incompatible. A very difficult situation to be in. But the sheer tears of joy at the release of those hostages is emotional, isn't it, when you think about that? 400 odd days living underneath the ground in cages, caves, tunnels. It's just unspeakable cruelty. And yet the world condemns Israel, not Hamas. They call good evil and evil good. There's an article by Chatham House. Chatham House is a think tank in the United Kingdom, and the dilemma that Netanyahu has is that he wants to make sure he's on side with Trump, but at the same time he wants to destroy Hamas. Trump's vision for the Middle East centers on two major strategic goals, said Chatham House: securing a comprehensive deal with Saudi Arabia based on the Abraham Accords, and establishing a Qatari gas route through Syria to Europe. We'll have a look at that in a moment. The Saudi deal would include a normalization agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, as well as a defense pact between Riyadh and Washington that could inject significant funds into the US economy. Saudi Arabia has already pledged to invest $600 billion in the US over 4 years. Now, I want you to notice that the basis of the deal that Trump is looking for is economic. Merchants of Tarshish deal with economics. They're interested in trade. They're interested in growth. They're interested in their economy. And that becomes the basis of all of the deals of the merchants of Tarshish. And this is no exception. Trump is a businessman first, a president second. And then he makes this extraordinary claim that the reason we can clean Gaza out is because we can get rid of the population and we can deport the population to places like Jordan and Egypt. And of course, Jordan and Egypt came immediately back and said, there's no way we're taking these people from Gaza. But this is Trump's sweeping plan. As mentioned, he wants to put US troops in there and create a Riviera. Well, we'll see how far that goes. But really, this is Trump sweeping changes that have not been tried or tested before. And he's doubling down. He's saying Egypt and Jordan will take these people. We'll take them. So we'll see what happens there. But if he cleans Gaza out, as he's expected, and establishes a situation where that hostility against Israel is diminished somewhat, there could be an opportunity for peace to develop. I'd like you to come to Ezekiel 37, just back a page. Ezekiel 37 is a chapter which talks about the valley of dry bones. Remember the bones coming together? It's a vision of the whole house of Israel, says verse 11 of Ezekiel 37. Ephraim and Judah, Jews in dispersion, Jews in the land, coming together, at last joined together as one nation with one king. That's Ezekiel 37. And part of that future development is described for us in verse 10. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they lived and stood upon their feet, an exceeding great army. Now I think, brothers and sisters, that we have seen just a little sliver of that military might. Verse 10 is future. Under the saints, Israel will be unstoppable. And what we have seen, the invasion of Gaza, if you look at the picture of Gaza, there's very little remaining. The intrusion to southern Lebanon and the absolute degradation of Hezbollah's capability. It's gone into Syria and removed the threat from Syria. It sent its planes across and destroyed missile sites, chemical weapons manufacturing sites in Iran, and it also hit the Houthi there in Yemen. And although it's just a little window of the might of Israeli intelligence and Israeli military might, it gives indications of what's going to happen when the Lord Jesus Christ comes, because all of those countries are going to be taken by Israel under the tutelage and direction of the saints. That whole region, the area promised to Abraham, we're brought to heel by Israel. And we're just seeing a little foretaste of that. And with Christ and the saints in control, nothing will stop them. An exceeding great army. Really quite a remarkable development. But here's the problem. And this is the new defense minister, new chief of staff. This war has demonstrated that we must be self-reliant, and that is the problem. Self-reliance. The Israeli Defense Ministry on Sunday highlighted its record-breaking operations throughout 2024, including overseeing the largest defense budget in Jewish states' history, $52.5 billion in a year. This year also saw the largest airlift operation in Israel's history, comprising approximately 670 flights and 130 sea shipments, delivering over 50,000 tons of essential military equipment, including missiles, bombs, tactical vehicles, and ambulances to Israeli forces. It has been a dynamic year for Israel. How can they afford that kind of money? Well, God ensured in the last 5 years that they discovered gas off the coast of Israel. They could have used that in 1967. They could have used that in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. But in the providence of God, it has only just been made available, and it's now providing very much needed revenue to support this war effort. But there's the problem, self-reliance. Self-reliance. And when our Lord comes and humbles the nation of Israel, they realize that they will need to be absolutely reliant upon Almighty God and his Son. What a change that will be. But Israel's got other problems. Having degraded the military capability of Hamas in Gaza, although Hamas is very much alive in Gaza, but not to the same extent, it's now got problems within its own borders. The West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, as the Israelis call it. And there's been an Operation Iron Wall, which has now moved into the area of Jenin, which is in the Jezreel Valley, and also Samaria, because of Hamas is now fomenting rebellion in those regions. And they're conducting airstrikes on these places. So it's not just boots on the ground. There's airstrikes. And this was just a headline of one of them, 10 terrorists dead in the largest raid in decades. And that's going to continue as they swing their attention to all of this destabilizing influence in the West Bank. Another significant move has been the removal of United Nations Refugee and Welfare Association, UNRWA. This organization has been, for the last 40, 50 years, poisoning the Palestinians against Israel. Their educational system is anti-Israel. Their relief system involves terrorists being involved at all echelons, and Israel has said the evidence that we produce from Gaza is sufficient for us to cut all links with this organization. Of course, there's a hue and a cry across the world. America has joined Israel in cutting ties with this association. So what Israel has done is it said, well, aid still needs to go into the Gaza Strip, but we will employ independent contractors. And they'll have nothing to do with the poison of this organization. That's quite significant. If you remove this source of poison, there is opportunity, at least for some people, to think about peace and security in the Gaza Strip. And tragically, Even in the shores here of laid-back Australia, there has been a massive increase in anti-Semitism. Global anti-Semitism surged 340% in 2 years, mainly because of the invasion, of course. 340%. So we have a synagogue burnt in Melbourne. We have a caravan found full of explosives in Sydney. We have disgusting graffiti across Jewish residences. We have pro-Palestinian marches. We have universities supporting pro-Palestinian educators and people across the university. And sadly, brothers and sisters, that's going to continue. Zechariah 8 verse 13 says this: "And it shall come to pass that as ye were a curse among the heathen, O house of Judah and house of Israel," that's both those Jews in the land and those Jews in dispersion, "so will I save you," which is the time when Christ returns, "and you shall be a blessing. Fear not, but let your hands be strong." So what that verse is saying is that this anti-Semitism will continue to be dominant across the world, Judah and Ephraim, until Christ saves them. So we can expect more of the same. Tragic, absolutely tragic. The last 2 days has been quite a flurry of diplomatic movement in the Israeli camp. Netanyahu has gone to America. And just before he went to America, he said, with the US help, we will redraw the map of the Middle East. And really what he was referring to was that his hope that the US will support the annexation of the West Bank. Now that is going to cause enormous ripples through the world. At the moment, the world, Australia included, seeks a two-state solution. 69% of Israelis do not want a two-state solution. They've seen what Palestinians in Gaza have done, and they do not want that repeated by giving statehood to those Palestinians in the West Bank. The world is trying to force a two-state solution on them. Netanyahu is trying to annex Judea and Samaria, and that will once and for all, if he gets through, disturb the world but kill the two-state process. The mountains of Israel, says Ezekiel 38, is where the invasion will take place. And that suggests that Israel will still continue to occupy in some form that central spine of mountains, which goes right through the West Bank. Whether he gets this, we'll see. At some stage, I think Ezekiel 38 will be literally fulfilled. I think the walls will come down, the barriers will come down. Incredible though that seems. The literalness of that in the record, I think, is quite clear. Is this a way of achieving that? We'll have to wait and see. It's very much a country in flux. Lebanon, just across the border. Well, I'm sure you're all aware of the incredible exploding pager episode. Quite a coup. Years in the planning, in which small amounts of explosive were embedded in lithium batteries within a pager. And at 3:30 on a certain day, a message went out to all those holding pagers, which were mostly Hezbollah operatives. And of course, it caused unknown injuries, disastrous injuries to the face, the ears, the hands, the body, as those exploding pagers took out a huge echelon of Hezbollah troops. Quite an amazing thing, an astounding thing. Condemned by most of the world, but it certainly worked in taking out a lot of the Hezbollah operatives on that occasion. And then they got rid of Nasrallah. And that picture there is the hole in the ground that the bombs created. 20 of them drilling down till finally they got him. And when they actually dug his body out of the rubble, he actually didn't die of being blown to pieces. He died of asphyxiation. The air sucked out of that region as the bombs went in, actually put him to death. And that was a huge blow to Hezbollah. They thought that the man was untouchable. And that was followed by Israeli troops storming into Lebanon itself. They'd learned lessons from the previous Lebanese war. And very carefully, they moved into the southern region of Lebanon and there found explosives, tunnels, far more sophisticated than what they found in Gaza, and managed to dispose of all of those. Quite a remarkable operation in many ways. But this has redrawn the political map in Lebanon. For the first time in many years, they've now been able to actually elect a prime minister and a president, which is quite an amazing thing because Hezbollah was preventing them from doing that. And this man, now with Hezbollah on the ropes, as it were, and politically in Lebanon, has now come to the fore and said that we will definitely enforce the ceasefire which Israel has established, and we will try and show an alternative government to Hezbollah. Now, if that continues, that there is the foundation possibly of peace. If Hezbollah is sidelined in the political environment, there is opportunity for peace to break out. This is a map of northern Israel and southern Lebanon. And you see there in blue the Litani River. This is quite a chasm that divides southern Lebanon from the rest of Lebanon. And the strategy is for the Lebanese army to move into these villages as Hezbollah gets pushed out. And as the Lebanese army takes over the villages, the Israelis will withdraw their troops from Lebanon. And as you can see from that map there, the green Lebanese army is taking their time establishing themselves in that region. Israel wants that buffer zone, wants to move their population back into the north, but the Lebanese army is taking its time. So what's happened is that the ceasefire has been extended to February the 18th. But once again, if they can produce some type of stability in that area of southern Lebanon, that is an inducement for the region to think about peace moves. Gaza. How'd you like trying to go home to that? You know, it is astounding, isn't it, really, when you think about the destruction wrought by Israel. Hamas hides behind civilian population, hides its military capabilities under hospitals, mosques, kindergartens, and tragically, the only way Israel can deal with that is by hitting those structures, to the condemnation, of course, of the world for that. This is the perversity of Hamas. Smashed to pieces, and yet they have the audacity to say, we won. And as people are going back to their homes and seeing the devastation, the tide is turning against Hamas. The ordinary Gaza individual citizen sees in Hamas thugs and responsible for all the devastation. So whilst all the hype of victory is there, that society will take years to rebuild. You know, one interesting newspaper article had this headline: first genocide, now victory. Palestinian Arabs and their supporters get called out for a narrative shift. How exactly can you win a genocide unless you were lying about genocide in the first place? So, you know, what do you want? You want Israel to be accused of genocide, or do you want us to have the victory? You know, you choose. And that's, of course, the stupidity and the evil of Hamas. You can't have it both ways. Look at that scene. Tens of thousands of people wanted to go back home. And when they got there, they blamed Hamas and they looked for some alternative. In fact, most of them went back to their tents because there was nothing left. And that's the devastation. And that's why Trump wants to clean the place out, to start again. As I said, he wants Jordan and Egypt to accept them, to clean the place out. And just today, he has said that he wants to take over the Gaza Strip. And that's interesting. Ezekiel 38 says about the merchants of Tarshish and the young lions, art thou come to take a spoil. And that implies the presence of those merchant powers in Israel at the time of the invasion. Is this the means? Is this the vehicle by which we will see a Western presence in Israel, a merchant power presence in Israel? We'll have to wait and see. Everything is in flux. Will this happen? Who knows? I mean, Trump is a man who has a lot of things to say, and next week he'll probably say the opposite. Who knows? He is a disruptor in every sense of the word. But this is the sweeping changes politically that he has on the agenda. Quite remarkable. Again, it could lay the foundation for peace. Let's look at Jordan. Jordan's one of those countries that has no natural resources. It's really an artificial state that was created after World War I and is heavily dependent on US aid. It's a remarkable country in that it is host to millions of Syrian and other refugees, Iraqi refugees who fled their country. It's quite an amazing place, but it is Palestinian to the core. And Abdullah II is walking a very, very careful line between appeasing his own people and accepting US aid. In fact, the mood in Jordan at the moment has been quite distressing for him. Even though Jordan assisted shooting down those Iranian missiles and drones, the population is still not happy with Israel. If Jordan is forced to accept all of these refugees from Gaza, it will only swell that uncertainty. And that is not good for Jordan at all. The return of Donald Trump, says Chatham House, is bad news for Jordan. And the reason for that is this, is that Trump has a couple of plans involved in that region. And the two reasons why Jordan are concerned is, one, because Trump ignored them in his first presidency, and why should it be any different in the second time? And two, there's a strong possibility that the US will give the green light for Israelis to annex the West Bank. And if they do that, Palestinians will again move into Jordan from the West Bank. So Jordan is still in this destabilized position. Now, we know from Isaiah 18 particularly that Jordan itself will become a refugee center for the fleeing Jews from Armageddon. So this nation, which accepts millions of refugees, is being prepared, ready for the time when God's people will flee across that Jordan seeking refuge. And a modicum of stability will be needed to house those refugees. Let's talk Yemen. That's a photograph of the Houthis blowing up a tanker that is registered by the United States, who of course support Israel in the war against Gaza. You're probably aware that Yemen is a strategically strong position because of the straits there, which most of the oil goes through to Europe on its way through the Suez Canal. And he who controls the straits controls that traffic. Well, they've backed down a little bit. They've said now that Israel's negotiating peace with Gaza will only target Israel-linked vessels. Now, prophetically, this whole arrangement needs to change. Yemen is the Sheba of Scripture. And Sheba, along with Dedan, will oppose the Russian invasion. So we need to see mighty changes in Yemen. How will that happen? Well, it's a wait and see. What is intriguing is that when America and Britain hit Houthi targets, it was a gun emplacement here, a gun emplacement there. When Israel hit Yemen, it shut down the airport, it shut down the port, and it shut down virtually all their fuel supplies. Now, that's the difference between Israel's attacks and America and Britain's. Israel means business. And in the end, if the Houthis continue to target Israeli ships, Israel has the capability and the capacity to hit this region hard. At some point, Yemen must become the Sheba of Ezekiel 38. Egypt's been an interesting country throughout this particular war with Hamas. What has been interesting is that the Arab powers, Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, have actually played down the distress of the Palestinians in this war between Israel and Hamas. It's really quite interesting that they have not supported Israel in the war, but certainly done a lot to diffuse any feeling of Palestinian support in their countries. But there was some disturbing news in the last few months about Egypt. Friend or foe? Egypt's $5 billion arms buildup, and the question no one is asking. And what's happening is that Egypt is borrowing huge amounts of money from the US to purchase weapons, and they're placing them strategically in the Sinai Peninsula. And Israel is now going to ask the question, what are you doing with all those weapons, far beyond any of your military capabilities, far beyond any of your defense measures? Why are you spending so much money militarizing the Sinai Peninsula? And watch this space. It is a worrying development for Israel. But apart from that, Egypt has remained on the sidelines. Russia and Libya. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. That was a report that went out. Russia's growing presence in Africa and its implications for European policy. Why is Russia interested in Africa? Well, as you can see from those maps there, it is dripping with oil in certain countries and has enormous mineral wealth in that country. Enormous mineral wealth. That's a map of the arms which Russia has sold to African countries. It is quite remarkable the way they have actually gone into this particular country. And what they do, said this particular article, is that they exploit chaos. So they will support a dictator. They will offer him arms and weapons at discounted prices. And of course, those people take it. Libya itself is a divided country. On the west, we have the UN and Turkey. On the east, we have the Libyan rebels supported by Russia themselves. And of course, Russia is doing all it possibly can to arm. We're not going to look at these counts, but what's happening is that Russia is pouring soldiers into Libya. They're fighting in Ukraine, but they're still pouring soldiers into Libya. And the same with Sudan. A civil war is developing in Sudan. You've probably heard about this, a huge humanitarian crisis. Two rival factions. And what has happened is that Russia has changed sides. Russia has shifted because it now supports the rebels that support the port. And the deal is, we'll give you weapons if you allow us shipping access into that Gulf, which allows us to control the waterways on the way to the Suez Canal. And the Sudanese armed forces have agreed we'll let Russian warships come into that port, exactly as Ezekiel 38 demands. And lastly, Saudi Arabia. MBS is the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. Doesn't look very happy in that photograph, but he's an immensely powerful person. Youngish man, a lot of energy. And of course, Trump is now going to target this man to create a bigger and better Abraham Accord. That's what his whole agenda is. This was a sign that went up in Israel. Congratulations, Trump. Make Israel great. Not just the US, make Israel great. And the three main policies that Trump has is to exert pressure on Iran, reaffirm Washington's support for Israel, and actively pursue the Abraham Accords. because this is where he's going. This is the economic corridor he has in mind. He wants India, Saudi Arabia, and Europe to be linked by a trading corridor that bypasses all the extreme positions of the Shiite regimes. It's on hold at the moment. That's his grand vision. And Israel, Haifa particularly, will be a transport mecca if that develops, and only pour more wealth into that region. Now, Trump's got a problem, and the problem is this: Saudi Arabia will not recognize Israel without a Palestinian state. And that was reaffirmed again today. The Saudi-Israel breakthrough is happening, said a US ambassador. So we get mixed signals. Will Saudi Arabia pursue the Abraham Accord? Well, I think yes, but there will be obstacles in the way. And that will change the dynamics of the whole region. A Sunni Arab power like Saudi Arabia having a peace agreement with Israel will change the whole region. That's what Trump is after. So let's wait and see that. From our perspective, brothers and sisters, when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them. They'll say it. There'll be declarations of peace and safety. Walls will come down, barriers will come down. There'll be this harmony amongst nations in the Middle East. And when that happens, Ezekiel 38 says, Russia will think an evil thought. Sudden destruction. The possibility of peace breaking out within the next 6 months, God willing, is, I think, certainly better than it has been for many, many years. Once it happens, it will grow. We could be taken any time. All we're seeing now is just the trending of prophetic events coming into place. And those trends ought to warn us that our Lord most certainly is at the door. You, brethren, he said, are not in darkness. We know the signs of the times. We know the events that are going to unfold. We are not in darkness, and therefore the day should not overtake us as a surprise. We are children of light, says Paul. Therefore, let us not sleep, but be sober. Watch and be sober. Clear-minded. We know where we're going, ecclesially, individually, family-wise. We know our priorities, and therefore we pursue them as in the day. The events happening are fluid. The events happening are exciting. The events happening are pursuing the divine purpose. Let us be as children of light, watchful and awake.